Meanwhile, schools are on Nebraska lawmakers' minds today.
Several committees are hearing arguments on the 10 Commandments, flag etiquette, and even bringing back school vouchers. First Alert 6, Joe Harris listened in and tells us more.
State Senator Robert Dover of Norfolk is trying to revive a state scholarship or voucher program for parents who want to send their kids to a K-12 private school.
We are told that if public schools just had more time and more money, they would solve these problems. Isn't half a century and who knows how many more dollars enough to show that this will not solve the problem for our children?
In November, more than 55% of Nebraskans voted to overturn the school voucher program that lawmakers passed earlier last year. Like that one, Dover's proposal would set aside $10 million to the state treasurer's office every year to provide those K-12 scholarships. Opponents say his bill contains no anti-discrimination clause to ensure equity in how the funds would be distributed, and that there's nothing to keep track of how effective it would be.
LB 624 lacks adequate reporting standards that would allow us to track the program's efficacy and provide transparency on how it is functioning. Without these safeguards, you risk endorsing a program that could operate without accountability.
Also Monday, the Education Committee heard a number of proposals concerning what students see in school, including a bill which would require public school districts and certain private schools to display the 10 Commandments in school buildings. Supporters argue this country's laws are based on them.
If our republic, our government of laws, is based on the 10 Commandments, then it follows that every American should know what they are.
Opponents say it shouldn't be up to the school.
And I am concerned as a person who does care about teaching the 10 Commandments. I believe that belongs in the hands of clergy and clerics and in religious institutions and with families.
And others call it unconstitutional.
Last November, an almost identical copy of this law, which was previously passed in Louisiana, was blocked by a federal judge as unconstitutional. If passed, this bill will almost certainly meet the same fate.
The bill's sponsor, Senator Dave Merman of Glenville, says a 2019 U.S. Supreme Court decision has opened new doors.
The majority opinion reads that the 10 Commandments have historical significance in our legal system and that their display may have multiple purposes and represent a common cultural heritage. Under that context, perhaps it would be good for our courts to re-examine the topic.
The bills must make it out of committee in order to move ahead to a debate on the floor. In Omaha, Joe Harris, First Alert 6.
Education Committee also heard debate on a bill that would require schools to display the state and national mottos in school.